All right, we had some technical difficulties finishing up the live stream, so I'm going to record the rest of the questions that I had. Unfortunately, I saved my favorite ones for last, so that's what I'm going to answer now. And if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. But also be sure to check out the actual live stream. I went a full hour before it cut out. I was really going to try to limit this one to an hour this time, but I got some really good questions that I really want to answer. So, I was wrapping up a question about more information about herbal uses for pets, and I did get to say quite a bit on the live stream before it cut off, so I'm not going to go all in here. I was wrapping up a story about my personal experience with my pit bull Maybelle, recovering from a very bad urinary tract infection that turned into a kidney infection. And basically what I was saying was that we used our urinary tract infection tincture and the same herbs that are in it, cleavers, chickweed, raspberry leaf, and goldenrod, and made a strong infusion that we added to her water on a daily basis. And she recovered within 2 weeks. It was really beautiful to witness, and we have been using herbs with our pets ever since. We also use CBD with our pets, and it's been really nice and effective for very angry goats, very excited red heelers on the 4th of July, you name it. Some other areas with pets that we use a lot of herbal remedies is topically, for hot spots, itches, cuts, tick bites, you name it. We use a lot of the same salves that we use on ourselves on our pets. Probably most commonly our anti-itch and our black drawing salve, but we have made a salve just for pets called Pet.2 that really has a little bit of everything. It's going to be a really nice wound healer. It's going to be full of like nice soothing herbs for itches. It's going to support hair growth from hot spots and wounds. It's really awesome. We get a lot of amazing reviews on that one. We also make an herbal blend that we add to both our chicken feed and our goat feed. We use herbs in our chicken and goat, like sort of nesting material, leaves, hay, pine shavings, just to like keep it full of fresh antimicrobial, antifungal herbs, just to keep any nasty bacterias from forming. Animals can get pretty gnarly. So I am going to be making a video soon just for using herbs with pets, but I did just want to note a few things and sort of wrap that one up. So an important question that I'd like to answer before I dive into some of the more personal questions was, what can be recommended for uterine fibroids? I'm struggling a good bit with them. I took Vitex in capsule form for a month and it helped tremendously, but I'm finding conflicting information on whether or not it can be taken long term. So here's the thing with Vitex. It is typically recommended not to take it for more than 9 months. The reason for that is not necessarily because it's bad to take it for longer than 9 months, but because you want to support your body's natural ability to do things like regulate estrogen. So it's a good idea to take these supportive herbs, but to also take a break from them to see if your body is ready to start doing some of those actions itself. So I am actually someone who takes Vitex very regularly, and I have for a really long time. It's been tremendously helpful for self-managing endometriosis. It's in our Moon Cycle Sync blend, which is something that I take daily. I do go through periods of time where I'll stop taking it for a few weeks, sometimes even a few months. And what I do for myself and some other people who use that tincture long term is I'll put the Vitex on the side. So that means that you can take the Moon Cycle Sync tincture without Vitex, which is really going to be just focused on symptoms that come with heavy periods, endometriosis, other sorts of menstrual related issues that cause a lot of pain and discomfort. So my suggestion to you would be, if it's working, continue taking it, and just try to take some breaks here and there and see how your body's doing regulating on its own. But there's a lot of other things that you can use for uterine fibroids too. I would absolutely recommend, if you're someone who gets uterine fibroids and has any other menstrual issues that come up with your ovaries or your uterus, is this book. It is called Herbal Healing for Women by Rosemary Gladstar. This was one of my first and most cherished herbal books. It is incredible. And so some of the things I wrote down in response was, okay, so a really interesting thing, I can't remember what doctor said this, but they said that cysts and fibroids are part of the body's natural defense mechanism, and that if the kidney is unable to function properly of detoxing toxins from the body will form a second kidney in the form of a cyst or fibroid that's holding those toxins so the body can get back to its equilibrium. And so most of the time cysts and fibroids are full of toxins, and it's what this doctor and a lot of other doctors believe to be helping the body to regulate by getting those toxins and putting them somewhere. So one theory is that if you have cysts and fibroids, especially reoccurring, then you should really be focusing on supporting the kidney and the liver and helping your body to detox properly. So and the lymphatic system. So another thing you want to be sure to do is try to avoid excess estrogen through foods. And just be sure to try to use other herbs that are going to support detoxification. So things that I would recommend specifically for liver, kidney, and lymphatic system is yellow dock is one of my favorites. Yellow dock is going to be great for blood purifying and detoxing for all bodies, but I personally feel, especially with its high iron content, that it has an affinity for the female organs. So I would absolutely put yellow dock at the top of your list. What is it, Olin? Also, for supporting female health in general and the lymphatic system, herbs like red clover, violet, raspberry leaf, cleavers, chickweed, these are all going to be things that promote detoxification and help to dissolve those cysts and fibroids. We actually have a it's called cyst busting lymph shaker that has all those herbs in it, and it's a really wonderful formula for helping to dissolve those fatty tissues that are just full of toxins that we need to get rid of. Okay, another one that I'm going to try to answer pretty quickly, I kind of already answered it in Discord. What are some essential oil-free mosquito sprays that I can use on myself and kids? So this is a hard one because we know that DEET is a pretty toxic compound that helps repel mosquitoes, but it's not natural. So most of the natural bug sprays that you see are going to use essential volatile oils that are very strong in scent to repel mosquitoes, like citronella, palmarosa, geranium. All those things are really great. So finding or making one without essential oils is going to be pretty hard because the essential oils in plants are what's repelling the mosquitoes in those natural sprays. So what I would suggest, if you are an essential oil free or an essential oil low and just conscious household, is to do like we do and make your own, because then you can control how many are in there and what quality they are. One of the best, strongest herbs I've found for repelling ticks and mosquitoes is catnip, specifically catnip and lemon balm. So what we do around this time is make a big old witch hazel infusion of fresh catnip and lemon balm, and that's the base to our spray. You could also use a tea if you don't have witch hazel by taking those herbs and infusing them in water, but you're going to want to make sure that you're adding a pretty good content of alcohol or preservative because water doesn't self-preserve. But we do add some essential oils to that as well. Like lemon balm, catnip, these are things you can put in water or witch hazel. Lemon balm, catnip, mountain mint, citrus peels, and cedar. Then some essential oils you can add: palmarosa, geranium, cedar, catnip, eucalyptus, peppermint, anything really strong like that. Oh, another thing I was thinking about today, because we use that on our animals too, because it's either in alcohol, witch hazel, or water, it is going to evaporate at some point. I've been wondering, and I have done this before, but I want to make it specifically for repelling bugs, about making a powder that you can rub into your pet's fur and into our hair that has some of those similar herbs that repel those things. What gave me that idea is that we make a dry shampoo that uses powdered garden sage, thyme, eucalyptus, some strong smelling herbs, and it naturally repels bugs. So if we added some more bug repelling powdered herbs to that, I think it could be really awesome. You can also add these types of essential oils to your laundry detergent to help repel bugs. And at that point, you know, those essential oils are being diluted by several gallons of water. So I don't think you have to worry as much about them being too toxic to the touch on your skin or to ingesting. Alrighty, I think we're almost to the questions that I've been looking super forward to. Okay, I've got one more before I get to the last two. My last two questions that I'm excited about, I had someone ask about my origin story, and I also had someone ask about my top homestead skills and the best order to learn them. But before that, I did get a question about good manufacturing processes, GMPs. This is important if you are producing herbal products and you're considering offering them to friends and family, or maybe even for sale. And the question is pretty extensive. I'm going to read it first. Do you write recipes for each formulation, including the weight of the herb and ratio to alcohol or vinegar, etc.? I don't really weigh my plant material, I just eyeball it, but that means my final product is not as precise. I keep a record of what I have made, but not of what is involved in making it. Basically just an ingredients list. I guess I'm just wondering how exact these need to be, and is there space for a more traditional method? A pinch of this, a handful of that, etc. He spoke about getting information from every manufacturer involved in your process. Do you get documentation from your alcohol manufacturer, water filter manufacturer? Do you do soil tests, etc.? Am I out of my league here? Is this more for larger businesses? So for one, my first response to this person on Discord was that I have a really awesome Instagram TV video all about this. It's called GMPs, where I really go into what that looks like for me, how you can start to think about it and incorporate it into your herbal business. I will say, in regards to the last question, am I out of my league here? One, it's not just for larger businesses. I do think this is something great for all size businesses. I will say I am 4.5 years into business, and I am really just getting strict about it. I've been working on it the past 6 months, but it took me a long time to get here. So you don't need to worry about it as soon, but I really wish that I did. So take that how you may. Good manufacturing processes are tricky because they're not required until they are required. And what that means is the FDA has their own list of GMPs for herbal supplements and natural products, but do you want to be FDA approved? If not, you do have statewide GMPs. And then there's also organizations like the American Herbalist Guild that have published their own set of regulations that they think herbalists should follow. So what I personally did was took a bunch of the suggested GMPs, went through and pulled the things that applied to my processes and my products, started really copying and pasting and compiling this research list, and then I hired a copyright person to go through and rewrite it to be like Cedar Hill Homestead good manufacturing processes. And because I wanted mine to like also be somewhat of a training manual, we're really breaking mine down into the process of making a tincture, a salve, a syrup, a body butter, oil, a serum, and like all of my different categories of products. And then we're really breaking it down into like, let's just say the salve page. It's going to be like, how do you prove consistency in your salves? How do you prove cleanliness? How do you prove that? Because that's what the health department and the FDA wants to know, is if they were to look into you, how do you prove efficiency, cleanliness, and consistency? And so what I do, yes, at this point, I do weigh everything. Here's a good trick for people who eyeball, because I am more of a folk herbalist in that I prefer the folk method. I prefer to eyeball. Just keep a scale out, because what you can do is weigh your jar and then you can eyeball the herbs and just put it on the scale and write down how much you put in there. At this point, I do have to aim for a certain weight to maintain consistency. I do purchase pure organic cane alcohol from a manufacturer, and I do have all the information from that manufacturer. I do have exact ratios that I use. And here's the other thing. It's taken me 4.5 years to get to a place where I have a set of recipes that I'll never stop making. And those are the ones that are in this book. I have a little section for my seasonal recipes, but I'm not quite as strict on those because I might be making those one time and then never again. So now that I've got this core group of annual products, that's what got me really focusing on GMPs. So I do have certain ingredients tested, especially when you get to a place where you're making 1 to 5 gallons of tincture at a time. You can send that off to a lab, and those lab reports are going to last you the length of that tincture, if that makes sense. So that's what I've personally done. Another thing I've had to do, you all know that I absolutely love wildcrafting, but what I've had to do to grow efficiently with my business out of respect for the plants and out of respect for GMP compliance is I've had to take my love for wildcrafting and turn that into just my seasonal products. That way my annual products are herbs I know I can always order fresh from my list of farms that I love. I'm growing them, whatever. That way I know exactly what variety of the plant it is, because you do want to document that in case one works better for the other, or one variety works better than the other. Maybe someone gets sick off one, it's too strong, it's got different reactions, etc. So also out of respect for the plants, I had to start thinking, okay, I'm selling a lot of these annual products. I need to make sure that the ingredients I'm using are plants that can easily be grown and they're not at risk at all. So I hope that answers that briefly. Definitely watch the IGTV video that I made and let me know what you think. I would suggest at least getting started by keeping a record. Just writing down what you do know about where you harvested the plant, what time of year, what variety you think it might be if you're foraging, or it is if it's homegrown, etc. Also, I use a Berkey water filter and I highly recommend it. Okay, now to the fun stuff. Where do I want to start? Top 5 to 10 homestead skills, and is there a best order to learn them? Okay, I really want to make a whole video on this. I love this question. And I think I'm just going to start by saying what homesteading is to me. Homesteading to me is using your resources and learning to make something out of nothing so you can live as frugally, sustainably, and efficiently as possible. So essentially what that means to me is creating a home or property, whatever you have, that is very self-sufficient. So certain things that we can look at is a garden, right? You grow a garden, you eat the food, you can compost the scraps that you're then turning into soil that you can then replant a garden into. You can also take those scraps and give them to your chickens, and your chickens are going to eat them and turn them into compost at some point. So that to me is like using your resources, making something out of nothing. So in this household, we do not waste a thing. And it's not necessarily because we're like greenwashing and we're like, no waste household. That's just the way you have to think as homesteaders. And what really jump-started that for me was when I was ready to stop working for other businesses and start working for our business. I was working about 2 days a week in town, was running this business and realizing like, okay, when am I going to jump off this edge, this cliff? Like I got to just do it, because at this point the job is keeping me back from making Cedar Hill my full time. But I'm scared if I make Cedar Hill my full time, I'm going to lose money and we'll go broke. So I had to make a compromise, and that compromise was not spending money and living as frugally as possible. And in order to do that, you have to make your own products. You have to make your own products, you have to grow your own food, you have to teach your animals, your livestock, how to forage so that you're not just constantly buying food for them. You have to use your resources. So let me think of some more things to say about that. So basically what allowed me to leave my job and make Cedar Hill my full-time was just that. We literally stopped spending money. And it's just getting thrifty and industrious and, you know, not buying new things when they break, trying to fix them instead. For example, I get on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace and I look for free wood all the time, and I'll spend like a weekend every few months driving around my town and picking up free wood. And then we've got a big wood pile in the backyard. So when we have homestead projects like building a raised bed, making a chicken tractor, etc., we have all of that material for free at our disposal. And if you look at our goat and chicken pen, it is not cute, but it's thrifty. We also look for free stuff all the time, like free tools and free wheelbarrows and free whatever. And, you know, we use our resources and we make the most of it. So, what else did I want to say about that? So, like, some of the first things that we started making it was really like when we made that switch. If we ran out of laundry detergent, if we ran out of toothpaste, if we ran out of dish soap, if we ran out of whatever, we would ask ourselves, can we make this? And most of the time we could. And once you start to build those bulk ingredients, like a giant bag of baking soda, a giant bag of citric acid, etc., you can make so much from those core ingredients. And one of the first recipes that I shared on Patreon for our citrus enzymes is a really great example of like a homestead recipe. That recipe is something that we use to clean our house, clean our clothes, clean our dishes, fertilize our garden, put in our animals' food for their digestive system. We use it for everything. And guess how much it costs to make it? Nothing, because we're using citrus scraps. And if we don't produce enough citrus scraps in our household, we'll go somewhere that sells lemonade or fresh orange juice and we'll ask if we can use their citrus peels. That is homesteading, is thinking that way. So if you're looking at a recipe for citrus enzymes that calls for citrus peels, rather than going to the store and buying citrus, you're going to think, where can I find citrus peels? This is something that people are wasting everywhere. So another example of homesteading is you know, let's just say we have, here's a great example. We eat a lot of tangerines, pears, and apples. Never do we ever throw away or hardly ever even compost the cores and peels of those things anymore because they have so many other uses. And one that I love to make is something that I put another recipe for on here, are scrap vinegar. Scrap vinegar is very easily made. It is a variation of apple cider vinegar where you take things like pear cores, apple cores, peels, citrus peels, whatever, and you utilize the wild yeast and you ferment them and you have a scrap vinegar going. And we pretty much have this going in our household all the time. So just learning to make something out of nothing, to me, is the definition of homesteading. And if you are starting to think about inviting livestock animals to your homestead, you want to make sure that even those animals are pretty self-sufficient. A good example is chickens and goats both are very self-sufficient animals because they forage. So we let our chickens run free all day. They eat all the bugs, grass, kitchen scraps that we could ever give them, and they're very happy. Not very often do we have to supplement with other feed. Another good example of super thrifty homesteading is something I read online, two things. One was fermenting your chicken feed to be no waste. And so what that looks like is, say you buy or you mix your own chicken feed. It's just grain, corn, etc. If you fill that bucket with water, leave the lid off for a couple days, it's going to start to bubble and naturally ferment. The cool thing about that is, if you throw out dry feed to chickens, they scratch through it, they kick it, they poop on it, and so some of it gets wasted. If you're giving them wet fermented feed, they can't kick it and scratch it and waste it, so there's less waste. They're also getting that really nice fermented food that's wonderful for their gut health, so their poop doesn't smell as much. They're laying bigger, stronger eggs, etc. So there's just so many things you can do. Another thing I read that I thought was so genius and such a good example of homesteading, this guy took a 5-gallon bucket, poked holes in the bottom and the sides of it, and whenever his family would eat like a whole chicken or a bone-in pork chop or whatever, he would take the animal carcass and put it in this 5-gallon bucket, and he would hang it from the chicken coop. Flies would form around it, and then their larvae would drop into the chicken pen, and then he had endless free chicken feed. That is homesteading. So there's just so many examples, and I'm going to try to share them with you all as often as I think about them, of course, but it's just so funny to me. Another thing, when you have fires, saving your ash for making your own lye for soap, saving your ash for mixing in your chicken coop because it's good for them to clean and rid themselves of mites, etc. Okay, I'm going to have to move on because this is too long here. Okay, so other ideas I put: food preservation, fermentation, canning, freezing, hunting, foraging, gardening. So to me, another big part of homesteading for us is that we forage and wild harvest animals and a lot of food, herbs, and medicine. And as you all know, that's a big focus on here. Something that I have thought about bringing to this that I'm a little apprehensive about is the hunting aspect. I think that hunting is incredibly sustainable, especially compared to people who are supporting and buying into the meat industry. One full-size deer lasts our family almost an entire year, with just a few other animals in that process, like some chickens and maybe some pig. But when you are eating nose to tail animal, you can really make that last for a family, and you're eating one animal as opposed to going to the grocery store, getting these different cuts of meats, and potentially eating up to 30, 40 animals a year, which is pretty terrifying to think about. Knowing what's around you. So most of you know that that's really our style of foraging. is rather than looking up, researching, and then seeking a plant out, we will typically go check out our surroundings. If we didn't live on land, that would include, parks, public land, game reserves near us, and we would start learning to identify everything around us so that we knew how to use what was already there. And that's a big thing that I like to teach about, because in times like right now where we can't leave our houses, we really can't order things online, what would you all do if this lasted for a whole nother year and got even more severe? You would have to turn to things that are already outside, potentially even to hunting and farming. So knowing what's outside is incredible, because the minute that you need something, you can go out and get it. Another thing that I like about that is that, if you know what's growing around you and what it does, then you also know which herbs around you are going to be dewormers that you can give to your animals, are going to be wound healers that you can use on your animals, yourself, your children, etc. Good protein for your animals, good detoxers, etc., etc. So knowing what's around you, knowing your surroundings, making something out of nothing, food preservation, gardening, these are all huge homestead things. If I had to say them in order, the first would absolutely be getting to know your land. I think that when you first move somewhere, to a piece of property, you should spend at least a year not putting pressure on yourself to build things or take on too many projects, and just walk the land as much as you can, get to know what's growing, get to see the 4 seasons there, maybe even document it some. And then you can really figure out too the lay of your land, which is important for gardening and for animal coops, etc. And then the next year you can start to incorporate a garden and potentially bring some animals onto your homestead. And if it's easier, to buy garden starts before you get seeds and before you start seed saving, just do it. If it's easier for you to buy animal feed at first, just do it, and then take the time to slowly ease into, a self-sufficient homestead where you're not having to buy those things. So fermentation is something that I talk about a lot on here. Things like the scrap vinegar, the kefir, sourdough, etc. Those are all things that don't require refrigeration, or at least mild refrigeration, tallow. And that to me is something that's very important when homesteading, is trying to be as energy efficient as possible. And for us, homesteading, we have to be frugal to supplement some of the income that you might have living in a city. So even though we have electricity, we will sometimes do things that are sort of off-grid to save on electric and to save on water. So one thing we do is we have a Berkey water filter, and we go and harvest spring water and run it through our filter. Another thing that we do is there is a off-grid crock pot, if you will, called I can't think of it. It's an insulated bag, and essentially what you do is, say you're making a stew, you would bring that stew up to heat on a pot or even on a fire if you want to get really self-sufficient, and once you've got it boiling, you're going to put it in this bag, tighten the drawstring, and that bag is so insulated that it's going to hold it at that temperature for 6 to 8 hours. So then instead of having a crock pot plugged in all day, you can have that sitting on your counter at that temperature all day, and you're saving on energy while getting a meal prepared for dinner. So there's certain things like that we really like to do. Fermentation is an incredible means of food preservation, as is canning. And if you're going to be gardening, I would highly recommend learning a lot about those things, because you are quickly going to learn, living out of the city and not being able to run to the grocery store every time you need. Food preservation is huge. A couple other projects that are pretty fun if you've got land is making a miniature root cellar, which you can do by digging a hole big enough to fit a cooler into, or a wooden box, and you're going to fill it with really nice fresh dirt like compost. And there, when you buy things like carrots, beets, cabbage, radish, root vegetables, you can store them out there in the ground for way longer than they would even last in the fridge. So just some little tricks like that are pretty awesome. Let's see what else I've got. I think that's gonna be it for homesteading, because I'm already like on, I think it's already been 2 hours if you consider the first live stream and this. So I'm gonna move on to my last question, which is, I'm curious about your origin story, and I wonder if you had any advice for a budding herbalist who struggles with retention and, for lack of a better word, regurgitation of information. Whew. Let's see. All right, my origin story. So, my grandparents lived in Madison, Tennessee, Harriman, Tennessee, and they didn't know it, but they were pretty naturally thrifty as well. And there were some certain aspects of their life, and my mother's life especially, that involved some homesteading skills. My mother is an extremely industrious woman who taught me everything I know about being thrifty and industrious. And so a lot of like do-it-yourself type skills I absolutely learned and was inspired by her and my grandmother. When I graduated high school, I left immediately. I moved to Colorado as soon as I could. And when I was in Colorado, I lived alone, and I had a lot of time to really connect with what I wanted to do. And in my time in Colorado, I lived way at the top of a mountain, almost off-grid. We lived truly at the top of a mountain. I was an hour away from the nearest police station, gas station, etc. There were only 50 people in my little mountain town. And the only thing we had up there was a post office and a bar. I did not have central air or heat. There was no air conditioning. There was no heat, just a wood-burning stove. We were responsible for chopping wood and keeping the stove going. It was pretty much constantly snowing up there, so I had to do a lot of snow-related things. And I just really fell in love with the self-sufficiency that living up there required. It was hard work, but it was really fulfilling work. And while I was there, I had a lot of space to just like I said, connect and hear my thoughts. And something in me was telling me to not just work with plants, but with people. And at that point, I didn't know exactly on what level that meant. But within a week of thinking about that, I was out and about at a coffee shop in Boulder after working, and I saw this man in the coffee shop that did not belong. Like, Boulder is super rich, hoity-toity, everybody looks the same, it's terrible. And there was this very large man who, sometimes you see people and they're not human, they're just too much spirit to even see human. He was totally that kind of person. I couldn't even really describe his face to you now. Anyways, he came and sat next to me, and we just started talking, and he asked what I thought my calling was, and he gave me his business card and asked if I would come and spend some time getting to know him and his wife. And he was a Lakota elder, and him and his wife were both Lakota. They were part of a Lakota tribe. And so I ended up spending almost 2 years driving to their home and their land and spending 2 nights a week with them for almost 2 years. And it was, to this day, the most influential and life-changing experience of my entire life. And to this day, it's very hard for me to speak about. But I owe all of my knowledge, everything I've learned about humans, plants, animals, spirit, everything, to not only Hawk, my teacher, but to his tribe that really took me in there. And I really learned a lot about myself first, which is what really allowed me to work with people. And the first thing that was really magical for me was, it's probably hard to believe for a lot of you, but up until the age of about 24, I was mostly silent in life. I did not have a voice. I did not speak. I was incredibly quiet and shy. I did not find my voice until I started managing businesses, and I kind of had to at that point. And I was usually ridiculed and told that I had no personality and things like that growing up, being very quiet. If any of you have ever experienced quiet or shyness, it's for some reason very intimidating to certain people. Oh, that's a little too bright. And when I would meet with Hawk and his people, they saw that as extremely honorable and respectful, because to ask a question was to be a fool. Because the way they saw it, what separated them from me? What did they have that would give them the answers that I didn't already have? So to them, if you had a question, you should get still enough and quiet enough to ask yourself and search for the answers within yourself. And that really resonated with me. So being around other people who didn't speak unless what they had to say was important or something of matter or love, was one of the most healing things to date that I ever experienced. Probably the greatest lesson that I learned from Hawk that really allowed me to do what I do today is, by the time I was there in Colorado alone, I was very weary, and I was much too weary for my age, and it was something that I would be told by total strangers. Like, total strangers would come up and grab my face and ask me why I was weary. And I recognized it. I hated it about myself. I really wished that I could just be, happy and normal and not carry around the heaviness that I did every day. Hawk was the first person to say, I can never quote him perfectly, but he essentially said something to the degree of, you will continue to live in your own hell as long as you don't realize how to use it. Like, he would always say, you have gone through everything you've gone through to share it with other people. And as an adult, I'm starting to learn through close friendships and people who really understand me that I have spent a lot of time in the underworld, in a very dark place. And I don't see it as a bad place anymore, mostly because of this experience. I learned that it was where the most growth happens. And most recently, I had a very dear friend compare it to the story Persephone's Path, where she spends half of her year in the underworld, and while she's there, she's experiencing all this growth and realizing that it's just as much a part of her process of being in the sun and out of the underworld. And essentially what Hawk taught me was, you live in the underworld, and you have lived in the underworld, so you can walk other people through there and also show them that it's not all bad and that it's just a part of their process. It's just a part of life. And that changed me to the core and showed me that it was a gift to have gone through the things that I had gone through. And still to this day, after doing consultations and just hearing so many people's stories, most people's stories and experiences I have some experience with to a degree. And I'm so grateful for that, because I cannot imagine being a practitioner on any level and not being able to relate to clients. And it's given me a really beautiful ability to empathize and put myself in people's shoes and really visualize the systems of their body and the emotional connection to those physical aspects, and I can really see them as a whole to see what plants they need. So I don't think I'm going to go any deeper right now. That is, simply put, my origin story. And this was a 2-part question. Advice for a budding herbalist who struggles with retention and regurgitation of information. So you must take my energetics class when it's ready, because that is everything to me. That is how I learned. With that experience with Hawk and his Lakota tribe, I wasn't learning herbalism at all. At no point ever was he like, you must learn about plants. But plants were a part of their everyday meals, medicine, ceremony, ritual, shower, you name it, everything. So naturally I was learning about the plants that were around them and around us. And so when I came back home to Tennessee, I already knew a lot of the names of plants from growing up in the South. I feel like Southerners have more names for plants than any other kind of people. But after learning the uses of so many plants, I guess when I came home is when I really started to dive into like, okay, well, I know this is mullein, I know this is lamb's ear, I know that these do things. And so then I would really just dive into what were the actions of the plants around me. And I think that's a much easier way to learn than by taking online classes from people out of your region and from reading through plant books. Now, at my level of herbalism, I enjoy doing those things because I like the challenge of learning about plants out of my region, because I'm starting to learn that the same plant families and even the same plants exist all over the world, but they look a little bit different depending on the different regions, because like people, plants have to adapt to their climate, their environment, etc. So they're going to have tough skin if they're in the Arctics. They're going to have little hairs if there's predators around, etc. So it's been a nice challenging aspect, but I always recommend to people that the first thing you do is learn what's around you first. Don't even think about tackling plants you've never met before until you know the plants that are right in front of you. Go outside, look at plants, and figure out what they are and what they do. And if it's too intimidating to do that via a book, call me, call your local herbalist, and have someone go on a plant walk with you. I think that's one of the greatest things that you can do. And that's why I love to do the plant walk videos that I do with you all, is if I were to just take a photo and you were to just see that plant still, you don't really get to see its environment, and you don't really get to see the way it sways in the wind, and if it's dense or hard, or if it's got little hairs, and what the back of it looks like. So in my plant walk videos, I really try to show you all of those things. So if you are to see that plant in real life, some of those little visual reminders will start to come back up. So retention and regurgitation are not going to be difficult for you if you're not overloading yourself with too much information to retain. So I do not just like sit around and read through textbooks. These are mostly things that I have on hand to flip to if I'm researching. But most of my herbal studies have come from going outside, identifying the plants, and then coming home and flipping through the books and looking online and reading everything there is to know about these plants that are outside. The energetics class is going to be great for you, because another thing that's super important is intuition. And just like the Lakota people would say, I don't have anything that you don't have. So intuition is something important to tap into. Most of the people who, actually all of the people who tested theories with plants, indigenous people who have been using these plants for thousands of years, did not have research and textbooks. they would make assumptions based on the plant's environment and energetics. They would document their experiences with it and make educated guesses. And that's what we get to do as modern herbalists too, but with more information. And so that's what I really dive into in the herbal energetics class, is how to take some sort of scientific facts that we have, merge that with your own intuition, and then you can really start to guesstimate things about plants and anatomy yourself. And it's going to sound far-fetched now, but I guarantee you when you take that class, you're going to be like, so I'm going to end it there. It's time for me to have dinner with my family. My apologies for the technical difficulties earlier with the live Q&A. This has been a fun video with some great questions. I love when you guys ask me more personal questions, because I am already only teaching through personal experience, and so when you give me the opportunity to share about my personal experience, you really give me the opportunity to dive all into how I got where I am and how you can do it too. So I'm going to do my best to get this uploaded onto YouTube tonight and hopefully share it with you all immediately. So again, thank you so much, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments for me.